but our predominant focus should be on poverty and on the 1.4 bottom billion poorest people in the world, according to the more recent estimates by the World Bank. The needs of the poor countries and poor people could well be forgotten, I have to stress, amidst the present need to recover the financial system and deal with feckless bankers and their sins. Let me say a few more words on consumerism. Responses to the crisis, as I said, should also go beyond economics and politics. Amitai Gioni, one of America's leading communitarian philosophers, has recently raised an important issue overlooked in the current debate and reflection on the implications of the crisis, namely whether, when the Western capitalist economies begin to recover again, we should return to business as usual or consider a different way of living, as well as trying to re-examine conventional definitions of what we currently call a good life. This is obviously a major issue that goes beyond the current discussion on which way capitalism may go and involves various disciplines in the process. Gioni goes further to argue that the link between consumerism and the global financial crisis is more than obvious. A culture in which the urge to consume dominates the psychology of people is one in which people will do almost anything to acquire the means to do so. In other words, working lavish hours, bending the rules to maximize profits, buying homes that cost beyond their means, and running up credit and card debt. A re-examination of this culture might be the right response in a post-crisis world. The crisis also raised serious concerns, I have to say, regarding the economics discipline. Even Alan Greenspan himself has admitted that the whole intellectual edifice of the efficient market hypothesis, in other words, that prices are right and markets are self-correct, collapsed in September 2008 and created a lot of confusion in the entire financial establishment, something that has been recently portrayed by some commentators as the priest who has lost faith but still has to go to church. The global financial crisis raised also substantial issues of whether 30 years of research in macroeconomics, but also in financial markets, have taught us really anything about financial crises, and in particular on how to spot them and what to do in order to fix them. Professor Calvo is among the notable exceptions in this case, I have to say. The perceived dichotomy between macroeconomists and financial market experts is partly responsible for that. What I mean here is that macroeconomists need to do more to understand how financial markets really work in their models, and those working in financial markets need to make an effort to fully understand the setting in which financial markets operate. One of the positive implications, so to speak, of the financial crisis and any crisis is that it offers an opportunity to reinvent economic thought. It happened with the Great Depression in the 1930s, it happened with the stagflation crisis of the 1970s, and I'm sure will now happen again. Indeed, creative distraction in the economic thinking might be the answer, or at least one of the responses to the crisis. We need innovative ideas more than ever in the aftermath of the financial crisis. This takes me to the next issue, much discussed in the summer of 2008, but also before that, namely the Washington Consensus collapse. Since the term was first coined by John Williamson in 1990, is mostly associated by many observers with market fundamentalism. In other words, the view that markets can solve most, if not all, problems by themselves. In their excellent book, The Washington Consensus Reconsidered, Nasty Serra and Joel Stiglitz rightly argued that in those countries following the prescription of the Washington Consensus, such as Latin America, 7 years of growth in the early 1990s were followed by 7 years of stagnation and recession. In other countries, though, in East Asia, which followed a different set of policies, enormous success was the final outcome. There is clear need, therefore, to formulate policies beyond the Washington Consensus in ways that they produce equitable and at the same time sustainable development. Again, the focus should be on poverty and on how to protect the most vulnerable through a series of policies that go beyond regulation to include social safety nets, compensatory mechanisms, and early warning mechanisms. A relevant issue is the development policy paradox here. In this regard, Dani Rodrik has rightly argued that while development seems to work, development policy does not, thus resulting in a paradox in international development. In other words, although the last 5 decades have witnessed an unprecedented improvement in the material conditions of hundreds of millions of people in the poorest countries in the world, development policy has to a large degree failed to live up its promise. Rodrik proposes a diagnostic approach, as we know, regarding development policy, which combines 3 main elements. One, the need to undertake a diagnostic analysis to figure out where the most significant constraints on economic growth are. 2, the need for a creative and imaginative policy designed to target the identified constraints properly. And finally, the need to institutionalize the process of diagnosis and policy response to ensure that the economy remains dynamic and growth does not peter out. This development policy paradigm in Dani Rodrik's world is based on his absolutely correct observation to me that our ability as economists to design and recommend growth strategies is extremely limited, and therefore anything goes in the process, and it is up to imaginative politicians at the end to come up with recipes that work. We should also remember that periods of stable economic growth in the capitalist model and its variations are rather not the exception and not the norm, since crises remain an endemic feature of capitalism. And crises are here to stay. Thus, crucial to create safety nets for those most vulnerable and protect the poor from the severe implications of the crisis. I want to add here that capitalism has always offered windows of opportunity to many for abusing the system and contributing substantially, if not creating, to a crisis. This has been wonderfully manifested, as many of you may remember, in the memorable performance by Michael Douglas in the big screen as the ruthless Wall Street player Gordon Gekko in Oliver Stone's legendary film about ruthless bankers and the dark side of capitalism more than 20 years back. It was 1987. Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is good, Gekko said in that film. Real life has also provided us with similar characters manifested in Link Gleason and casino-like speculation in derivatives in the 1990s, and more recently Bernard Madoff, among many others. The list seems to be endless, and many more will follow in the years to come, since greediness is a key endemic element of capitalism, although taking various forms in various countries, as history always teaches us. We need to remember that Nick Leeson was able to do what he did in the 1990s, not just because of the complexities of the financial markets and the weak financial controls, but also because of the corporate hunger for even greater profits. So, in an era of the post-Washington consensus, many models of capitalism are in the menu. We need to remember, though, how we moved from the type of managed capitalism to remarketized capitalism in the 1980s, and more recently to the global capitalism stage. Is now time for a new era for capitalism and the end of the remarketized capitalism? Recent calls for regulation in the aftermath of the crisis in relevant markets are associated with this, but it is rather premature to me at this stage to jump into conclusions regarding the end of remarketized capitalism and the rest. We need, however, to bear in mind the various types of capitalism emerged in economic history and the variations within each type. The Japanese model of capitalism with Zaibatsu as its main feature in the past, in other words, the emergence of large industrial groupings combined with selective government intervention, see Robert Wade's classic Governing the Market on this, is substantially different than the Swedish or the Nordic model of capitalism, the variations of the managed capitalism within the European model, and of course the more recent and rather unique Chinese model of capitalism. In this context, I want to stress that welfare state and welfare capitalism means completely different things in the above different models of capitalism. Furthermore, I want to remind ourselves that similar policy prescriptions to deal with crises in the past had different effects in different countries.